hi everyone, and thanks for joining this this webinar series on the Satellite Business Week. Stefan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for being with us. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Thanks for your invitation.
Thank you for joining again. If you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a few words to introduce our talk of today, quite shortly, just to give some context. So our topic today, we're going to talk about the transformational impact of constellation on the launch industry. We have about 30 minutes. I'm sure it won't be too long. As you know, the space industry stands at a very specific momentum of its history with the deployment of the large constellations that are game changers, not only for the market they're serving, but also for the entire supply chain, including the launch suppliers who reinvent themselves, who are adapting to this changing environment. Now, Space has been in the launch business since the early days of commercial activities, of commercial space activities. You've seen a lot of changes over the decades. I mean, not you personally, but the company. I mean, even though I think you are close to 10 years of position at your position in Space. So the company have seen a lot of changes over time. Since that time, still you have continuously established yourself as a market leader in the commercial launch services. You shared leadership over time with different companies that have changed over time themselves. I mean, the competitors of yesterday are not the competitors of today. So I think that at the end, you've been going through a lot of all these period of evolutions of the industry while maintaining this leadership position, which I think makes your perspectives regarding the current period of change even more interesting and relevant. So we start the discussion. Just for the audience, please don't be shy. Do not hesitate to shoot your questions. Try to grab some on the fly during the conversation, as well as Ina said, we'll try as well to keep some time at the end to reserve your questions, which I think will be as well very much awaited. So to start, and maybe before we jump on the specific topic of the constellation, Stefan, if you allow me, maybe to start by asking you a more general question about the current market context. Always very useful to start like this and to introduce the situation. 2020 obviously was an unusual year in so many ways, very much challenging for everyone, for the industry. You had to go through your own specific challenges as well last year. So could you give us, in short, briefly, your perspectives for 2021? We are mid-year, so what do you expect for this year?
Yes, for this year, in terms of launch, we are very ambitious because we target approximately 15 launches from 3 different spaceports, Kourou and the Guyana Space Center for sure, but also Baikonur and Vostochny. And half of our activity will be dedicated to OneWeb, and the other half of the activity with Ariane, Soyuz, and Vega to other customers. So OneWeb will be very important, and it is a constellation. And among the launches we are going to do this year, there is this very ambitious project, which is James Webb, which we are going to deliver by the end of the year. So in terms of launches, big number expecting this year. We will see how things are going to materialize. In terms of contracts, we have discussion with the European Commission for a framework contract on Galileo and Copernicus. This will be very important for us, and this will be one of the key events of the year. After, we will have more classical discussions with our commercial customer, either on the geo-telecommunication sector or for constellation. You know that OneWeb is contemplating a Gen 2. You know that the European Commission is pushing for a constellation. There are other projects of large constellations. So all in all, a big number of launches, the contract with the European Commission on Galileo and Copernicus, and discussion on constellation and GTO satellites with our commercial customers.
Okay, well, that's clear. Maybe another question before we jump to the question specifically of the constellations. This is the start of the year, and we've seen interesting dynamics in the launch orders, catching back from catching up from especially from maybe lower activities or lower contract activities last year. Interestingly as well, maybe contracts going to a much more diversified set of suppliers, including launch suppliers, including new entrants. So what does it mean, this new competitive environment for the introduction of two new launchers with Ariane 6 and Vega-C?
For sure, Ariane 6 and Vega-C are arriving in operation at a period of time where competition has increased. You have more competition from the United States. It is quite obvious. And you have also, but we do not speak here about the same competition, you have newcomers in Europe with micro or mini launcher. What is important to have in mind is that Ariane 6 and Vega-C are about giving Europe a long-term autonomous access to space by having the capability to launch all European payloads, which was not the case up to now. The second point, Ariane 6 is 40% cheaper than Ariane 5, and I can tell you this is a result of a huge of work to manage to do so. And last but not least, when you take the new market trends, the fact that the telecom satellites are much more diverse in terms of volume and mass. When you take the constellation, it happens to be that Ariane 6, with its versatility, is perfectly adapted to these new market trends because we have a bigger fairing, we have a restartable upper stage, we have the auxiliary power unit, which is a complementary engine which has been qualified by Ariane Group a few days ago. And when you take all these parameters, we will be able to accommodate much more versatile missions and flexible solutions, either on the segment of the GTO satellites or for constellations.
Okay, so let's talk about the constellations, since this is the topic of today. So obviously radical change in terms of volume of deployment. We're talking if everything goes as we plan today, but things change from one year to another, but around 1,500 satellites to be deployed roughly every year over the next 10 years. So radical change of magnitude. On this, half, if things are going as planned, should be dedicated to 4 mega constellations for telecommunications. So speaking about these specific large constellation customers, and you started to discuss this a little bit, what is Arianespace specifically offering for these constellation customers? How do you dedicate specific solutions, and how do you differentiate yourself with respect to the competition?
Yes, so constellation will be one of the engines of the market for sure. In terms of volume, but also in terms of value, it will be much more important than the classical GTO segment. It would be a multiplication by 3 or 4 in terms of volume. So clearly something is happening here. You know that today we are the only company which is deploying a commercial constellation with OneWeb. I say that because our competitor SpaceX is deploying Starlink. It's not a secret, but Starlink is their own project. On our side, in 2015, it was in London, it was in July 2015, we have signed with OneWeb. And at this period of time, some people were saying, it will never go to an end, and so on and so on. We are now 6 years after. We have made many launches for OneWeb. I do not remember whether it's 5. I think it's 5 already behind us. We are going to deliver up to 10 launches this year for OneWeb. So our first strength is the fact that today Arianespace is the only launch service provider deploying a commercial constellation. And the story of OneWeb is very interesting because OneWeb has had some difficulties last year. But what do we see today? We see that OneWeb has as shareholders the UK government, an Indian company, Bharti, and a French company, Eutelsat. So we see that the project is now very robust and there will be a Gen 2, and we will be candidate for sure for the Gen 2. There will be competition, no doubt, but we will be candidate. What we can offer, I think, is 2 or 3 things. The first is that, as I have said, Ariane 6 happens to be perfectly adapted to constellation. Ariane 6 is a big launcher. In its version 64, it has approximately a 20-ton capability in low Earth orbit, and large constellations are looking for big launchers. We must avoid the confusion between small satellites and small launcher. Small satellite, when it is isolated project, scientific project, maybe Earth observation project, can look for small launcher, rideshare solution. But when we speak about large constellations, they need big launcher, and Ariane 6 will be one of the bigger launcher on the market. The second thing is that with Ariane 6, we will be able to launch every 2 weeks. It's not the case with Ariane 5. It was approximately once a month. So we will have more availability, which is very important. So we will have a turnaround which is much more improved as opposed to Ariane 5. And the launcher per se, with a restartable upper stage, giving us the possibility to go to different orbital plans with a longer fairing, is also perfectly adapted to having a lot of satellites under the fairing. For OneWeb, if you take OneWeb satellites, in an Ariane 64, you could put 78 OneWeb satellites. So it gives you an idea of the competitiveness of our offer. Last but not least, we are neutral. I mean, we are not committed to one project, which will be our project, which is the case of SpaceX. SpaceX is working for SpaceX, and SpaceX is competing with its customer. We are at the service of our customer, and I think at the end of the day, it will also make the difference because we are the only one who can offer this capability and this neutrality on the market with this experience we have today with OneWeb. In the past, we did Globalstar and other constellation, but we know perfectly well how to handle with big numbers of satellites.
You've spoken about the launch cadence, especially that you will be able to increase with Ariane 6. We're really, with the constellations, we are really talking about a significant change in terms of the requirements of the launch tempo that is basically required from the industry. With a lot of short cycles, but heavy, intensive cycles of deployment. How do you see, how can the launch industry meet these launch tempo requirements? Do you see that there is some risk of bottleneck at some point? What are the key factors to successfully meet this cadence?
It's clear that if all the projects are materializing, there will be a demand for a lot of launchers, and we will have to get organized to answer this demand. Again, with Ariane 6, we can launch every 2 weeks. It means that we could do more than 20 Ariane 6 per year. The industrial tool, as it is today, has been designed for 11 to 12 launches per year. But if we add customers for more launches than that, it's absolutely possible, and we have studied the case, to increase the number of Ariane 6. So we must be ready to very flexible scenarios. There is a scenario where the constellations are more difficult, then we will have less launches. There is a scenario where we launch for one constellation, and there is another scenario where we have 2, 3 constellations. We will see. They may not come exactly at the same time, but my message is clearly that if Arianespace has to launch more than the nominal targeted cadence of Ariane 6 today, which is 11 or 12, with investment, it is perfectly possible. And for sure, if this project materializes, there will be a demand for a huge number of launches, not only in Arianespace.
Is as well the versatility requiring, or do you think that makes sense to have this multiple launch site strategy? There's a lot of spaceports developing in different countries, or different countries trying to develop spaceport and to get some partnerships with launch service providers. So you have your Russian options with Soyuz. There's French Guyana. I mean, if there is a kind of acceleration of launch cadence, could we see Arianespace launching from elsewhere?
It's today Arianespace is launching Ariane and Vega from Guyana, and we are launching Soyuz either from Guyana or from Baikonur or Vostochny. We have no intention to launch Ariane and Vega from other spaceports. It's the CSG is a wonderful spaceport. It has many advantages in terms of proximity to the equator. It is a result of decades of investment, and it is not in our intention to go elsewhere than in the Guyana Space Center, where we are working on a daily basis with our public partners such as CNES for sure. After, you have some ambitions of spaceport in Europe. These ambitions are more limited to micro and mini launcher. And again, I want to be clear, micro and mini launcher will not make the job for big constellations. So these spaceports may be complementary, maybe we will see, but they will not have the capability to launch medium and heavy launcher, which are the one relevant for constellation projects.
Still with this multiplication of projects everywhere, including in Europe, are you concerned about the potential impact on the sustainability of the business, about the risk it may? Is it all good in terms of dynamics, or do you see some risks in terms of
I think impact? It's good. I think it's good to have an appetite for launchers. You know, some years ago, some European states were not very interested by launchers. So for me, it's a fundamental good news that there is more interest than in the past for launchers. After, we know that the European market is limited in terms of value and volume. It is 5 times smaller than the US market. So we must face this reality, because it is clear that if we multiply the project, we may be less strong, because we could dilute our capability. Bon, we will see. We will see where this micro and mini launcher will go. I think what is important is for the long run to have some consistency. We have Ariane and Vega, and I think this is around these 2 launchers that we must build the future. We will have to reinvent ourselves. We will have to prepare the next decade. The future of the sector will bring a lot of changes. We are ready to embrace these changes, but we have 2 priorities. Let's make Ariane 6 and Vega-C a success, and let's get organized in Europe to accelerate and speed up innovation. And these 2 ambitions are complementary, because if Ariane 6 and Vega-C are not a success, it will be much more difficult to convince the European space community to go on investing in the sector. So we have these 2 pillars of our ambitions, and I'm sure we will deliver on these 2 pillars.
On to come back to the constellations, how do you see the requirements from these customers evolving as they get more mature? They're gaining in maturity as they are deploying their infrastructure. The situation, as I said, of OneWeb 5 years ago is not the same as today. So they're getting as well maturity and experience in their procurement, in their deployment. It's true as well in all the smaller constellations in Earth observation as well. For instance, they are getting in more maturity. So have you seen some changes in their requirements, in the way they procure launch services, in what they expect? And do you see further evolutions actually?
Yes, you're right to say that OneWeb is a very interesting case to illustrate what you have said. When OneWeb was launched 5 years ago, or even now 6 years ago, it was more about a business case, which was supposed to be a B2C business case, business to customer. And now OneWeb has reoriented its business case towards business and towards governments. So this is where they consider now they will make their turnover. So we see here a progression of maturity. I think constellation will be about both. I think some constellations will be more dedicated business to business or business to government. and other constellations which are more dedicated to targeted mass market, final customer, will be more oriented towards final customer. But OneWeb is really a good example. Again, they have been through challenges, but now they have very robust shareholders and investors. The deployment of the constellation this year is going full speed. We are going to make the third launch of the year next week. So we are going to launch approximately once a month, and we see that they are more precise on their business case.
There's one question on ride shares. Maybe you talked about this a little bit before. How the ride share launch models is changing the supplier customer relationship?
But clearly, you have on the one side large constellation requesting big launcher, but you have one customer, so it's quite easy. And after you have more limited project where you will have to accommodate with a big number of customers. We have done with Vega a rideshare launch. It was the 15th launch of Vega. We had more than 50 satellites on board. Recently, the return to flight of Vega, we had 5 small satellites on board. It's clear that this community is widespread, that it means that you will have to speak to a customer basis, which is more important than what we used to do. You have also some broker, some integrator, and you will have to accommodate quite complex missions. So yes, it is changing the way we speak to our customers. Some of these small sat players are linked to science, university research. Others are startup. Some others may be backed by a stronger player. And this is absolutely a new community, very diverse, and it is changing the business.
Maybe one last question on the constellations, and tell me if it's not a good question. In this case, we switch. From my perspective, the constellations also impact the market addressability, the overall market addressability. You talked about this because of vertical integration. Half of the mega constellations are vertically integrated. Even on the other small sat constellations, you have shareholders that have interest in multiple business areas, including in launch. So does it mean that at the end it's changing the structure of your open market? It's reshaping the competition and potentially more impact as well, more intensity in terms of pricing. Does it really reshape the competition?
Yes, we see that at least one player has decided to manufacture, to launch, and to operate a constellation. It is SpaceX. It will have a lot of consequences because they are becoming more and more a competitor to the rest of the value chain, the satellite operator, for sure, but also the satellite manufacturers. And we prefer to be in a model where the roles are not the same when it comes to the satellite manufacturer, the satellite operator. After, with the European project pushed by the European Commission, you could have a consortium, you could have an alliance between different players which are not exercise the same role in the value chain. You know that we have delivered to the European Commission a proposal for this constellation. We are part of a consortium with satellite manufacturers, satellite operators. So yes, a constellation may push for alliance project, but on our side, we consider that we add value to the market, not to verticalize all the market. And also, and I think this is important, we need a sustainable space. We need the low Earth orbit to remain practicable in the long term and not to be a sort of a junk space or a private space. And we favor constellation. We think this is a big engine for the market, but we want a responsible space, a sustainable space, and we will really defend this model as opposed to a sort of Far West model, which I think would not be sustainable.
What is the role of the governments with respect to that sustainability, and what is the role as well of a launch company like you in this sustainability?
The launch company, in French we have the space law, and one of the innovation of the French space law is the fact that with Ariane 6 we are going to deorbit of upper stage. Today it's not the case with Ariane 5. With Ariane 6 we will deorbit after the end of the mission the upper stage. It means that we will leave behind us a clean space. Regarding our customer, they will also have to demonstrate their solution to deorbit the satellite once the satellite will have finished its mission, to avoid having dead satellites in low Earth orbit everywhere. And after, in terms of regulation, there is an entity which is based in Geneva, the ITU, and more, the ITU will have to put some rules for the low Earth orbit, and it must be complemented by space situational awareness, space traffic management. So you need to have industrial players, commercial players who are abiding by, I would say, rules led by a clean space. You need to have a regulator, and the only regulator must be the ITU in Geneva. And you need to have capability to avoid collisions and debris in space through space traffic management and space situational awareness.
Okay, I think that's fair. We have taken already some questions from the audience. I see just one additional. Recently, Arianespace made an announcement with Spaceable, a French company working on STM. Can you elaborate on this partnership?
Yes, it's Spaceable is a startup which is proposing very innovative solutions which are linked to the mitigation of the risk of constellation. They are supported by AXA, and it's not a coincidence. It shows that such a big insurance company is interested by avoiding this kind of risk. So they are now consolidating their business case. They have gathered the first round of investors, and they have indicated that their satellite, which will be a way to mitigate some risk linked to the constellation in orbit, could be launched by Arianespace. We think it is also our duty to support startups whenever we can. We are an incumbent. We are there for now 40 years. Our parent company, Ariane Group, is also not a newcomer. But if we have the capability to support startup, to work with startup, we will do it. And I think the last thing to do is to oppose the two worlds. There is not the old world and the new world. There is a world of the space community. And what we do with Spaceable is to show that we are fully ready to work with startups and to welcome their expertise and their ability to speed up innovation.
I think that's perfect for concluding the talk. We could have continued much longer, but we are constrained with time. So thank you very much, Stéphane, for your time.